to ask questions or to make a comment, because oftentimes it's difficult. At the end, you might forget or something might not pop up. So feel free to ask questions anytime. Okay. Okay. So we had spoken about church, and one of the big things that happened right in the first real century after the resurrection of Christ was that as the apostles went out into the world, they now started to call the Gentiles in to the fold of Christ, to bring all those who were waiting in darkness to the light that Christ had brought to the world. And so we see the fulfillment of Jesus' own words that we read in John's Gospel when he says, "And other sheep I have which are not of this fold," so not of the fold of the chosen people, of the Jewish people, "them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd." So we see here Christ himself speaking about the one church, the one body of faithful, being made up of both Jew and Gentile. And so we see this manifest itself now in the apostles. We see this also in the book of Acts, in the 13th chapter, when Paul and Barnabas, they had just preached to a group of the Jews in the synagogues, and many of them began to receive the gospel and to follow them. But because of this, the elders, the Jewish elders, became angry, and they basically started to persecute Paul and Barnabas.
Sorry, Father.
Yes? Can you hear me?
Is there slides to go? Yes, is there slides?
Oh, yes, there are slides. Okay, let me double check. Okay, let me switch off my camera. Oh, yeah, I'm 2 slides down. It's a gal share now. Okay. Not that important slides. Okay. Can you see now? Can you see now?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. There we go. Okay. So this is from the book of Acts. Let me read it for you. "Then Paul and Barnabas waxed bold and said, 'It was necessary that the word of God should have first been spoken to you,'" so to the Jews, "'but seeing you put it from you and judge yourselves unworthy of everlasting life, lo, we turn to the Gentiles. For so hath the Lord commanded us, saying, I have set thee to be the light of the Gentiles, that thou shouldest be for salvation unto the ends of the earth." So this kind of turning towards the Gentiles is this fulfillment of really Christ's prophecy and Christ's will, right? God's will, that all men shall be saved. Okay, and so we see this now play out, especially, of course, the first arena is the Roman Empire, right? Because this is mostly, and this was obviously a very large empire encompassing different nations and people, but it was through the Roman Empire and its system of roads and whatever, that Christianity was able to spread very quickly. Okay. So before we talk about how the pagans, the Romans, and the pagan nations became Christian, we have to understand a little bit what the Roman religion looked like. Now, of course, it's a difficult thing to encompass in a short lesson because it wasn't one cult or one religion. It was a multiplicity of various cults and devotions to various pagan gods. But basically, as we did mention last time, that at the time of Christ, at the time of the apostles, Rome had expanded greatly, and so it had its own imperial cults that people would follow, and some of them were kind of general civic duty type of religion, where people would basically just offer certain obeisance to the gods of the empire, but it wouldn't be a very personal thing. It would just be kind of like an act of an act of obedience or whatever, civil duty. But also more kind of something that had become very popular at that time was kind of mystery religions. So like the famous Mithras cult, which was actually exclusively made for men. Kind of like that way. Lots of mysterious kind of ritual acts that people would do. But basically, if you went to any Roman city, there would be a multiplicity of various kind of temples dedicated to different gods, and the religious life would be mostly about exterior, certain rituals that people had to partake in, right, in order to bind themselves to this god, and what they believed would bring kind of order, right, in their society. I wanted to read a few things and then maybe give a comparison. So the Romans were far less concerned with what individuals believed. So this is now the Roman Empire and the officials. They didn't really care what people believed individually and internally, like what was in their hearts, right? But they were very, very much, they cared about whether they performed the correct rituals in the proper way. So Roman religion was there to secure the cooperation, benevolence, and peace of the gods. So basically, they didn't want to offend the gods. They wanted to be on the good side of their gods, right? This was called the Pax Deorum, right? So the peace of the gods. Make sure that we do all our rites correctly. We offer these certain offerings. Before we do this, we have to do this offering. Before we do this, we do that offering. And there was a whole bunch of rules that kind of came out of this, right? Called the Jus Divinium, the divine law, right? So I was trying to think of a comparison. So if anyone's traveled to maybe like a Hindu country, so Bali is maybe a place that some people have been. But for example, in Bali, you can actually see something that would be kind of similar. So in Bali, at least the locals who are Hindus, practicing Hindus, of course, they've got their own kind of, I don't know the details, but it's obviously its own kind of localized version of it. Every morning, if you walk in the streets, you'll see in people's gardens and people's little shrines, they put these little kind of offerings, like it's a little rice cake and a little thing, whatever, and usually they light incense. And this is like a ritual that they partake in as a kind of, it's kind of like an obedience, right? That you do towards whatever local god, family gods or ancestor gods, or you go to put it in a certain temple, whatever. This particular type of exterior acts would be something that you would see very much so in Roman religion. The interesting thing about it is that it doesn't necessitate any interior change. It's just kind of like doing what's going to appease the gods, right? Okay, what you believe is gods, and but there's no real interior change, or not doesn't necessarily mean there's no moral real motivation behind it. And so at this particular time, Roman people were actually longing for a deeper, more mystical, more real participation in God, right? And this is why they started to get interested in these kind of mystical cults and things like this, because it was a way to have a personal some kind of personal relationship with God, right? Of course, now these unfortunately, right, were mostly formed. They formed various strange cults, like the Mithras cult and whatever others that were deluded and worshipping false gods. But that desire remained, because for the average Roman, their religious life was like almost like a civic duty. It's like almost going to go like do your duty for the empire, right? Do what you need to do for the gods, and then continue with your life. And mankind is not made for that, right? Mankind is made for a genuine relationship with God. right? So this is what already in the hearts of the Gentiles, it was this longing for a meeting with the true God. Okay. Now Christians came around. So now these Christians are themselves ex-pagans, right? Who had accepted Jesus Christ, accepted the teaching of the apostles. So what made them different? Now we know that Christians didn't necessarily wear different clothing. They participated in in general life, like they went to buy food at the markets. They participated in the economy. They didn't isolate into kind of totally separate ghettos or something like this. Yeah, sure, of course, there were maybe Christian sections of the cities and things that grew up, but in general, Christians mingled with society. But what made them different was that they preached exclusivity in their religion. So they didn't, like the pagans, they didn't say, oh, everyone can have their own gods. You have your God, you have Jesus. The pagans say, you can worship Jesus, I worship, Ceres or whatever, or Jupiter. Let's all just be friends. It sounds very similar to actually our age. What's happening now in the modern world, it sounds very similar to what the Romans were kind of, how they would view how people should hold together different groups and nationalities. It's like everyone has their local gods. But the Christians disagreed with this, because they said there is one true God, and the gods that you worship it's not the truth, right? And so they rejected that system, and part of their rejection was they refused, obviously, to worship other deities, and they also refused to honor the emperor as a divine figure. And this is something that actually started really relatively around the time of Christ, really, where the emperors started to, not all of them, but started to basically declare themselves as gods. And so people had to kind of offer a kind of an act, a kind of a symbol of this, by offering incense as a demigod or whatever. And this is something that Christians refuse to do. Now, other pagans, they didn't have a problem with that, because they were like, okay, I have my gods, and I'm in the Roman Empire now, so I'll do my duty. But the Christians refused. And this is really what made the Romans dislike the Christians. Because to them, religion is a public expression of loyalty, right? I'm loyal to the empire. I've lit my incense, just like I was showing, in Bali, they put those little offerings out. Why are the Christians not doing that, right? The Christians refusing. They're not participating in all the local cults, right? They're not performing the sacrifices. So they are therefore subversive, right? Christianity was then seen by the Romans and the Roman officials especially as a subversive religion. They even claimed Christians were atheists because they were not honoring gods, right? You see that in some of the Roman writings. But this is something that Christianity has always maintained. This is the underlying conflict between the true faith that Christ brought into the world, that is, there is one true God that has revealed himself through Jesus Christ, and that there is no other God. There is no other. Of course, Christians recognize goodness in all nations, and even remnants of the true faith in other religions. We call it the Logos Spermaticos, right? The seed of the divine Logos within, but nevertheless there is one God, right? And so Christianity was not syncretist, right? Christianity was exclusive worship one true God. And some received that message and believed and rejected all of the falsehood, but others refused to. And this is where now begins this conflict between Christians and the pagan Romans. Okay, here's a fresco of Saint Nicholas destroying the idols at some kind of Colosseum. There's some stories about St. Nicholas, how he would really struggle, not struggle, but he would go into kind of like a spiritual battle when he would destroy all these idols being inhabited with demonic forces, basically, that had, receiving worship. And so that's just a fresco about that. As I was saying earlier, one of the biggest reasons why pagan Rome began to turn towards Christ is because the people were longing for truth. That question was in their hearts, right? And there's this famous dialogue between Christ and Pilate in John's Gospel. And this dialogue is really Christ speaking to the Roman mind, like the Roman position, right? And I didn't have all the words, but basically, this is one of my favorite paintings, by the way. It's kind of like very paradoxical. It's Jesus standing before Pontius Pilate, but the artist Nikolai Gere, he kind of put Christ in like looking like very, how can I say, like disheveled and not glorious in like the shade, right? While you've got Pilate, you're standing in the light, kind of overshadowing this kind of more arrogant kind of this arrogance of like Rome, right? And this painting is called "What is Truth," right? Because Jesus said to Pilate, I have come to bear witness to the truth, and everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. So Jesus says, whoever is seeking truth hears me, what I say. And then Pilate says, what is truth? He wants to know what is truth. So what he doesn't know is that he's speaking to the truth, right? Jesus Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So the truth become incarnate, right? The true God. So, and this is something that pagans began to realize when they learned about Christ. If there's a question, you can just jump in.
Father, I think this came up in a while back when I think a similar topic was covered, but it's interesting you were just saying that this is speaking to the Roman mind, because as it turns out, the Latin translation of what Pilate asks Christ in the Gospel of John, where he says, what is truth? In Latin, it's quid est veritas. And it turns out that that's an anagram for est vir qui ad est, which means it is the man who is here. So like it is the man who is before you.
Yeah, amazing. Yes, yeah. Amazing. I think this is what Nikolai Gay was trying to kind of, Christ is veiled in humility, which the pagan mind, but I mean, I suppose every fallen human mind expects to see God come riding in a chariot of gold and glory. But the true God comes down and becomes a lowly man to save us. This is the truth. The man before you, right? I mean, and Pilate himself says, "Behold the man, ecce homo," right? As well. When Jesus comes out, ecce homo, which is also one of his famous two-liners, behold the man. So he was probably just saying it as behold the man, but he's really pronouncing something very profound, which is the new man, the Adam now, the new Adam, the true man. Behold, here he is. The same reason,
answering his own question without realizing it. And
exactly.
and within the Latin anagram itself, the answer was there.
Yeah. The amazing thing, like so much that the Romans were doing in the time of Christ's trial and crucifixion, they were doing kind of mockingly, but yet ultimately actually as a kind of prophetic act. Like the soldiers were bowing to him, mocking him, like worshiping him, like as a joke. Yet in 300 years, the Romans will be bowing their knee to Christ. It's amazing, like when you really think of it like that. But so the truth is that when Christianity and when Christians and the apostles began to preach and to teach them about the teachings of Christ, who he is, what he has done for mankind. This truth resonated with the Romans, well, the pagans, and they realized that this was the embodiment of all the things that they were seeking. I mean, part of what the Romans inherited from the Greeks was this kind of the philosophical tradition, and also what it means to be a good man, what it means to have a good life, and questions of virtue was a big part of it. And also eternity. They had this obsession with being remembered. Actually, it's interesting. The Romans were totally obsessed with being remembered. That's why we have quite a lot of archaeological evidence, because they were kind of making nice graves and things for themselves. So they were longing for eternal life, but they didn't know how to express that. So they were longing for eternal life in like a worldly sense of like making monuments and things for themselves and getting a good name for yourself so that your name would continue. So all of these things they found now fulfilled in the truth that was not just a kind of made up philosophy, but a real concrete experience of Christ. And I mean, so someone like, and interestingly, this Sunday we commemorate Saint Justin Martyr. He's often called Justin the philosopher, but he was a pagan that became Christian, and he basically speaks about how all of the good things that the pagans had, he says, they're actually the property of the Christians. He says, I'll read it for you this is in his second apology. He says, for whatever things were rightly said among all men are the property of us Christians. For each man spoke well in the proportion to the share he had of the spermatic word, seeing what was related to it. So he's saying that whatever good and truth did exist in the philosophical tradition, pagan tradition, was logos spermaticos, right? The seeds of truth of the word that somehow find at least some root in this. But he says this ultimately belongs to Christ and the Christians, right? And so this was one of the big realizations why so many pagans started to come to Christianity. It was no longer a kind of mixed, garbled, religious, like a plethora of religious cults and, complicated rites and rituals that didn't really point to any ultimate truth, right? They knew there was something deficient in this. And so they looked towards this revelation that had been given to them. The other thing we have to also understand, and we see this so much in the history of the church and in the lives of the saints, is that this divine love that Christ showed his disciples was something that the disciples then shared with the world. That was very, very shocking for many, many pagans, and it's even becoming apparent in our own day how far away we've moved from Christian love and devotion and care for one another. But we see so many witnesses of how Christians loved and cared for one another. The amazing thing is, this comes from Christ. When Christ healed people that were not high in society, they were not famous, they were not, he came down to heal everyone. And he showed an immense devotion and love towards mankind. He's the perfect expression of God's love. And so this is what Christians brought into the world. And we see this in the way they treated people that were, for example, imprisoned, people that were like orphans and widows, all those people that were kind of suffering and marginalized. Christians showed great mercy for them without any particular gain, right? You don't gain much if you help orphans, right? Or you don't gain much if you help someone that's in prison, right? What is he going to do for you? Nothing. Who was it? We remembered Saint Procopius, who was a pagan soldier, and the Christians came and showed him great mercy, and he was so impressed by their love for him, a random young man who wasn't even a Christian, right? So Christians formed these house churches, these communities. Now they were closed in the sense that you couldn't just come into their community. It was closed to pagans because they didn't want people to blaspheme what their teachings, right? Their teachings they kept quite secrets. From the outside, Christianity looked like another mystery religion in a sense, because they kept the mysteries the mysteries away from the eyes and the ears of pagans who could blaspheme it. But with who was received into these communities was very telling. And we know this because when you look at the statistics of who was becoming Christian in the first 3 centuries, disproportionately we see that women and slaves were joining. It wasn't just like a men's club, like the Mithras religion was only men were allowed, from what we know. In Christianity, higher class, lower class, men and women were being received, and slaves as well. We know this as well because even in the letter we're going to read today, Ignatius speaks about how slaves, if a slave, and there's canons in the church that say if a slave should become a priest, his master must release him, whatever. So slaves were becoming Christians, right? And they showed great love for those who were imprisoned and suffering. And this as well was something that impressed the pagans, right? Especially in times of pandemics, there's lots of famous stories how when there was a pandemic in a city, the pagans would flee and leave their sick ones, and the Christians would stay. Now, part of that love has to do with the lack of fear of death, and that's something we'll talk about now. Christians didn't fear death the same way as pagans did because Christ granted them eternal life. So bodily death didn't scare them. Right, and so, but nevertheless, part of the telltale signs of the Christian community was that they loved one another, right? Jesus himself says this in John's Gospel. He says, a new commandment. So this is the new commandment that Christ gives us. I give to you that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. So the reason why this is a new commandment, right, is because we hadn't experienced this expression of God's love so clearly as in the experience of Christ himself becoming incarnate. So now this is the new commandment, that our love must exceed the love of the pagans. Our love must exceed the love of the Old Testament, because now we have seen the love of God and we have to emulate it, right? And this continues to be the commandment given to Christians, that we have to go above and beyond what the world thinks is love, right? Okay. So there was radical compassion and radical virtue. Now, this is not just something that the Christians said about themselves, right? This is something that you can even find in pagan writings, and often the pagans were a bit salty about it, okay? But that's what makes their witness a bit more strong, right? It's because it's these pagans kind of not really wanting to say how nice the Christians are, but they kind of have to because it's so obvious. So, for example, I found a writing of Lucian of Samosata. He really didn't like the Christians, and he was kind of trying to mock the Christians. So one of his colleagues, whose name was Proteus, he was imprisoned, and basically his whole career and everything ended. And so he now speaks about, I'm going to read this. This is part of one of his writings. But this is what he says. He says, then at length Proteus was apprehended for this and thrown into prison, which itself gave him no little reputation as an asset for his future career and the charlatanism and notoriety seeking that he was enamored of. Okay, so he's kind of mocking him, saying, he was seeking all this reputation and now he was in prison. Well, when he had been imprisoned, the Christians, regarding the incident as a calamity, so as a tragedy, right, left nothing undone in the effort to rescue him then. As this was impossible, every other form of attention was shown him, not in any casual way, but with assiduity. And from the very break of day, aged widows and orphan children could be seen waiting near the prison, while the officials even slept inside with him after bribing the guards. Then elaborate meals were brought in, and sacred books of theirs were read aloud. So we get a glimpse of what it looks like when a Christian was imprisoned. The Christians would be hanging around the prison, trying to free him. Then when they couldn't free him, they would they would stay there by him, and they would bring in. Now he says elaborate meals were brought in. Probably what he witnessed was actually them bringing him the Eucharist. Because what is an elaborate meal to a pagan? Something like very solemn, right? So they were bringing him the Eucharist, and they were taking their sacred books. He doesn't know what these books are, and they were reading them aloud. Interesting. So they were reading the scriptures aloud at the prison. You can kind of get a picture, right, of how dedicated Christians were when their brother was imprisoned or suffering. They would immediately gather together and help him. This stood out a lot to the pagans, right? This is a painting of de la Tour, also one of my favorite painters. I have many favorite painters. He liked to play a lot around with light, you know. This is a picture of, I think it's Saint Irene recovering the body of Saint Sebastian. And this was another kind of thing you read about, is that when Christians were killed, the Christian woman, pious woman, would come and recover the body of the Christians. They didn't want the body to be desecrated, you know, eaten by dogs and rats and whatever. So they would take the bodies of Christians and give them a proper burial, and venerate their grave, basically, and their body as a witness to the willingness to die for Christ. And they often themselves did this in great peril, because they themselves would be arrested and tried. And we see this many times, that many Christians were in fact arrested for recovering the bodies of Christians that had been killed. Okay, but this again was something that was very powerful for the pagans. They were like, these Christians love one another. They're willing to die for one another. You know, this is something that was seen as a great virtue, even among, you know, definitely among the pagans. Okay, so now we come to probably one of the most powerful witnesses and also reasons for the conversion of the pagan Roman world to Christianity, was the great witness of the martyrs, which actually means witness. As I said earlier, of course, many Christians, when faced with persecution, when faced with death, they denied Christ. That's absolutely true. I will show you a little bit of evidence now after the slide. But many hundreds of thousands did not deny Christ, and they died for him. And this was something that was not on a small scale, because the Romans began to notice this pattern, that Christians were willing to die for what they believed in. This is something very different to what Roman religion was about. You would die for your own causes, right? For what you were trying to get, but not for like a personal belief or something. So this is what this letter, this very ancient Christian letter to Ignatius says about persecution. He says, he's speaking now about Christians. He says, so this is from the year AD 130. So all of the writings I'm showing you tonight are very early, like the year 100, 130, that kind of time. So he says this: when punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. They are assailed by the Jews as foreigners and are persecuted by the Greeks, yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. This is also an interesting sign of the demonic oppression that so many of the pagans had, was that they couldn't really pinpoint why they hated the Christians. Because Christians were, although they did not offer offerings to the pagan gods, they were still civilly obedient. They weren't rebels and troublemakers and lawbreakers. And so they were abiding by the law, but it was their faith in Christ that made people hate them, because they were basically demon possessed, right? The evil one hates Christ, and so people under this influence hate Christ because they are influenced by the demonic. This is just something that is absolutely true. And what's amazing is that just like Christ turned his crucifixion into a weapon of victory, so the martyrs themselves, the hatred, this irrational demonic hatred of the Christians took that and they allowed their bodies to be broken, to be killed, in order to wake up the pagan world out of that kind of sleep, out of that kind of delusion. Because there were so many moments, and we see this time and time again in the lives of the early martyrs, the life of Saint George, the life of many of the Saint Euphemia, you can name so many. While they were being martyred and they refused to give up Christ, the torturers themselves flipped. They're kind of like, and they, on that very same day, they gave their life to Christ and they died together with the martyr. And that shows that they realized during the persecution, the trial, the torture that they were instructed to do from the emperor or whatever local ruler, they realized that this was like an irrational and like a didn't make sense. What has this person done that is evil? And so they decided there and then, hearing this person confess Christ, that I would rather die with this person than because they're following actually what's true and I'm deluded. I mean, this also happened with the 40 martyrs of Sevast, where one of the soldiers who was guarding, not allowing the Christian men who were basically condemned to die in the cold lake, he himself went and stood with them. He said, I will rather stand with them. He wanted to gain a crown with them. So it's really an amazing, but it took the courage and it took the sacrifice of Christians to bring these people out of delusion. So let's criticize our generation for a bit, because I think this is part of the catechesis, is not to praise ourselves. We praise the early Christians, but us as Christians today is not the reason why the world is falling back into demonic delusion, because Christians are unwilling to sacrifice for Christ. And so they no longer are bearing witness to the truth because of their lack of willingness to suffer. So what we must remember, though, is that we think sometimes in the early 3 centuries that Christians were always being persecuted. That like basically if you were a Christian, you were literally like living in a cave, and basically you couldn't even go outside, like a kind of zombie apocalypse or something. But that's not really the case. These persecutions came in waves, depending on the emperor. So I've put just a couple of dates so you can kind of get an idea, right? So the first persecution, which many of the apostles themselves died in, was under Nero, right? Nero used Christians because they were kind of a minority in Rome. He blamed them for the Great Fire of Rome. Most historians now actually believe that he himself burnt down some of the kind of shanty towns of Rome to free up some real estate, basically. And he just blamed the Christians so that, wow, let's just blame those guys. They're kind of the outsiders, right? Marcus Aurelius himself disliked the Christians and persecuted them. Decius, and I'm going to show you a document now from the time of Decius. And the Decian persecution was probably the first very large, extensive persecution. Let's just say that spanned the whole empire, because he saw that these Christians who weren't offering the civic religious obligation were kind of disintegrating the great Roman Empire. And so he forced Christians must offer sacrifice, and those who don't will be killed. And so obviously the Christians refused, and so they were killed. Valerian as well. So we see the gaps are not that big sometimes, but you've got decades between. Valerian was persecuting Christians, but then he was captured by the Persians, terribly killed. In fact, the Christians actually saw that as divine kind of punishment for his persecution of Christians. But then the very big persecution happened under Diocletian. Many of the great martyrs that we know, George, Theodore, they were all killed under the Diocletian persecution. And this basically ushered in the final age of martyrs in the pagan Roman world. And the Diocletian persecution was so great and so violent that many pagans had become kind of sick and tired of this terrible violence that was unjustified. You know, which was the pagans themselves were saying, you know, like they recoiled seeing how many Christians and women and all these were being killed. And so it was kind of like this final great act of sacrifice that the Christians made in order to turn the minds of now the people. Okay. Is there a question?
Father, I was just reminded with talking about the persecutions of Diocletian. I learned about an amazing saint. It's actually, like, I don't know, to me, among all the various saints who around this period who suffered all sorts of terrible things and worked miracles in the process. Yeah, I love the story of Saint Kyriaki.
Yes.
Is it okay if I just share? It's just a short
absolutely.
thing about it.
Absolutely.
So this is just from that Trinity, Holy Trinity Orthodox Church calendar thing. There's a harmony video that does an animation of her martyrdom that's very good. I'll post it on the group later. But so she's commemorated on the 7th of July, which functions as 20th of July for us. But the Holy Martyress Kyriaki, or Kyriaka, Kyriakia, sorry, suffered for Christ at Nicomedia during the time of a persecution under Diocletian. She was the only daughter of the pious Christians Dorotheus and Eusebia, who had given a vow to dedicate their daughter to God. At the beginning of the persecution, Saints Dorotheus and Eusebia were separated from their daughter and given over to trial under the governor Justus, but Saint Kyriakia was sent to Nicomedia to the co-ruler of Diocletian, Maximian Hercules. The holy martyress firmly endured the tortures, praying to God. The Lord worked many miracles to bring the idol worshippers to their senses. Idols fell down in the pagan temples, just as they brought the saint there. Wild animals brought to the martyress lay down peacefully at her feet. Seeing this, many pagans were converted to Christ. When the sentence of death was read, Saint Kyriakia requested time for prayer. After a final prayer, she peacefully died, delivered by the Lord out of the hands of the Roman executioners. So she was able to give up her spirit as Christ did, before they were even able to swing the sword to behead her.
Absolutely. So we have so many accounts of brave Christians, including many women, who had such a love for Christ. Many of these women had consecrated their lives to Christ in a kind of monastic, we would say, a monastic type of vow. And so they loved the Lord, and they saw this as being absolutely loyal to him. And this painting I've put here for us is a kind of moment where the Christian woman is being asked to basically light incense. It's just putting some incense, basically showing like obedience to this pagan idol of Artemis, and she's refusing. And to the pagan Romans, it's like they're like, this is ridiculous. Just do it. You know, it's just an outward act. But to this Christian woman, it's a betrayal of Christ. And so this was one of the main tests of Christians, right? Was this particular giving offering to these idols that they refused to do, that basically would sign their death warrants. So I wanted to just talk about the actual evidence of this, because, you know, some people, some historians actually did kind of have this idea that, oh, this is just kind of Christian propaganda creating hero stories. But archaeological evidence shows the opposites, that these things are very real. So one of the things that we find two in some kind of excavations, they found papyrus of documents, kind of boring documents, but among them were these things called libellus, right? Which are basically like little pamphlets or little declarations, little basically receipts given by various whatever local rulers, Roman rulers of the time. Now, some of them they have found you can actually see the original. So the original kind of receipts when a person would go and offer to a whatever local pagan god or to the emperor, and then there would be a witness that would sign and say, this, and this person has made their offering, therefore they are free to go. So basically testing who's Christian and who's not. And we actually have these. I didn't want to show that one because the text was quite long. But this is a particular papyrus of this one of these libellus. But this is basically a warrant of arrest for a Christian. It's called the Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 3035. Every papyrus in archaeology is given a number. And this is what it actually translates to. It says, from the governor to village rulers and officers of peace, at once send us Petesarapion of Horus, a Christian, or yourselves come up during the 3rd year of Valerian and Galenius the August. And then it says Pharamenoth the 3rd, which was the Egyptian reckoning of a month, basically. I can't remember which month. In fact, you can see it here. This is the word Chrysanon. So they actually didn't really, there were variations how they would describe Christians, like Christianin or Chrysanon, basically, right? Because they were just hearing who these people were. So this is an original warrant of arrest for a Christian, actually in existence, that they still have from the time of Valerian and Galenius, exactly dated, right? So it's quite amazing, actually. It's from the year 256. Okay, so very deep in the persecutions of Christians. So this Petesarapion was killed for Christ. He's a martyr for Christ. Here is an actual receipt for his, arrest. So many Christians, sadly, but I don't think any of us would be any different, got these letters and basically handed in. See, I've done my obeisance to the emperor. I've lit the incense. Okay, thank you. I'm going to continue with my life. But many refused. We have the story of Saint Perpetua and Felicita. She refused to do it. Her father, who was a Christian, yet he did it. He said, just do it for your child. Just sign the thing, and then ask for forgiveness, kind of. But she refused to, and she died for it. So I just think it's amazing that we actually have evidence of these things happening, not just the stories of Christians. Okay. We also have, for example, certain writers. One of the famous ones is Galens the physician. He was a Roman physician, Galens of Pergamum. He basically in passing mentioned Christians, and he very grudgingly does say that they were quite brave and virtuous, although he also didn't like the Christians. But he says this: of this sort we now see the people who are called Christians deriving their faith from such elusive sayings, so again mysterious things that they don't quite understand, yet on their part deeds have been produced equal to the deeds of those who are in truth philosophers. So he's already saying their deeds are great, like the great philosophers, right? For example, that they are free from the fear of death is a fact which we all have observed. So this is now an anti-Christian saying, we have just observed these guys aren't scared of death. Likewise, their abstinence from the unlawful practice of sexual intercourse. And indeed, there are some among them, men and women also, who during the whole of their natural life refrain altogether from such intercourse. So this is the monastic life. Including in the early church, married couples would decide to live a celibate life. And some of them have attained to such a degree of severe self-control and to such earnestness in their desire for righteousness that they do not fall short of those who are in truth philosophers. So he's trying to kind of like compare them to the great philosophers of old, like Socrates or whatever. Like these Christians, they don't fear death. They have virtue. They have piety. They have sexual morality. They're not like the Romans, who were basically sexually quite immoral in general. Not all of them, but it was kind of like a hallmark. And he grudgingly praises that. Okay. This is a cheesy AI picture of Perpetua. I would recommend everyone who hasn't read her diary and the martyrdom of Perpetua to read it, because it gives you a real first-hand account of the sufferings and the struggles that Christians went through in the time waiting up for their trial, and then finally their execution, usually in the Colosseum or whatever kind of court where they would be tried and killed. She was killed by the sword in the end, although first she was thrown to a wild cow, basically, like that they usually, it's actually is recorded in a martyrdom that's how they would usually kill the young woman. They would bring an animal that would like be fitting for the particular person. So they would throw men to the lions and leopards, and women to like a wild boar or like a cow or something. So the cow mauled her, but she didn't die. And in the end, a gladiator had to come and actually basically kill her by sword. And it's recorded that she actually took the sword and she held it on her throat, kind of guiding the gladiator. So amazing, powerful witness of martyrdom. In fact, I wanted to read the account of her martyrdom before we finish off with the epistle. This is just a small part of the story of Saint Perpetua, but I thought, let me give you an account. So this was now recorded. This was obviously written by Christian witnesses, that they added this to her diary entry at the end, right? So this now they're describing, she's just now been thrown into the Colosseum. She has just she had a baby, and her servant Felicita had just had a baby, and now she was brought into the Colosseum with Perpetua. So these are these young women. So it says this: the populace shuddered as they saw one young woman of delicate frame and another with breasts still dropping from her recent childbirth. So already the writer now is saying, even the people were kind of like shocked to see these two young women being brought to be killed as a kind of entertainment. And the one had just given birth. So being recalled, they are unbound, and Perpetua is first led in. She was tossed and fell on her loins, and when she saw her tunic torn from her side, she drew it over her as a veil for her middle, rather mindful of her modesty than her suffering. Then she was called for again, and bound up her disheveled hair, for it was not becoming for a martyr to suffer with disheveled hair, lest she should appear to be mourning in her glory. So she rose up, and when she saw Felicitas crushed, she approached and gave her her hand, and lifted her up. And both of them stood together, and the brutality of the populace being appeased, they were recalled to the Sanavarian gate. So they basically brought them out. They were mauled by this cow. Then the people were kind of appeased, and they brought them back. Then Perpetua was received by a certain one who was still a catechumen, Rusticus by name, who kept close to her. And she, as if aroused from sleep, so deeply had she been in the spirits and in an ecstasy, she began to look around her and to say, to the amazement of all, I cannot tell when they are to be led out to that cow. And when she had heard that that had already happened, she did not believe it until she had perceived certain signs of injury in her body and in her dress, and had recognized the catechumen. So she had already been mauled, and she was kind of speaking to the people, and she didn't even know that it had happened. I suppose it's a mixture of she's deeply in prayer, the adrenaline's going, and all that kind of thing. Afterwards, causing that catechumen and the brother to approach, she addressed them, saying, stand fast in faith and love one another, all of you, and do not be offended at my sufferings. So what she's trying to say is that when you see me suffer, when you see me die now, don't be troubled. And when the populace called for them into the midst, that as the sword penetrated into their body, they might make their eyes partners in the murder, they rose up of their own accord and transferred themselves whither the people wished. But they first kissed one another, that they might consummate their martyrdom with the kiss of peace. The rest, indeed, immovable and in silence, received the sword thrust. Much more Saturus, that was one of the the catechumens who was killed, who also had first ascended the ladder and first gave up his spirit. For he also was waiting for Perpetua. But Perpetua, that she might taste some pain, being pierced between the ribs, cried out loudly, and she herself placed the wavering right hand of the youthful gladiator to her throat. Possibly such a woman could not have been slain unless she herself had willed it, because she was feared by the impure spirit. So there's a lot of information going on there. The writer here, who gave a kind of a witness of her martyrdom, speaks about how the evil one really feared Perpetua, which is why he's saying, she couldn't be killed unless she allowed it to happen. The evil one feared her so much, and Perpetua writes in a diary about certain dreams and things she had, about how her martyrdom was really a match, her against the devil, against evil. And this is what I think encouraged the Christians, is that they saw their suffering as, first of all, sharing in the suffering of Christ. And so they would be crowned with the same crown, crowned with the crown that Christ prepared for them, but that also that their suffering was a battle against evil in the world, not as a failure, but as an overcoming evil with sacrificial love. And so I suggest for all of you to read that. It's an amazing account. Okay, we are already at 8 o'clock. So, of course, those of you who need to go may go. We've only now got to the Epistle of Ignatius to Polycarp. It's not that much text, but let me try and not comment on it so much. I'll just add a few small comments. But as a kind of closing off of our discussion on the first few centuries of Christianity, now I wanted us to look at kind of how all of these themes of pastoral love, of the Christian community and its structure, and also this martyric spirit is all encapsulated in this letter of Ignatius to Polycarp. Why? Because this is a letter that Ignatius is writing on his way to Rome to be tried and killed. And he did die in the Colosseum itself. But he's writing to a fellow bishop, so they're both overseers of a local community. Ignatius is from Antioch, Polycarp is from Smyrna, and so he writes to him. So I'm going to try read as clearly as I can and try to comment a little bit so you can get a feeling of this letter. So please try listen attentively. One last thing before I read the letter. So Ignatius is writing to Polycarp of Smyrna. These are some of the great apostolic fathers who really were the next link in the chain to the apostles, after the apostles. We even have an account from Irenaeus of Lyon, who lived a bit later, who speaks about Polycarp, who he knew when he was a young boy. So, and he regarded the memory of Polycarp as a link to the apostles. So in his letter, so Irenaeus of Lyon is another church father. He wrote to Florinus, was a fellow student of Polycarp. And this is what he says. This is what he's saying about Polycarp, how much he loved Polycarp. I could tell you the place where the blessed Polycarp sat to preach the word of God. It is yet present to my mind with what gravity he everywhere came in and went out. What was the sanctity of his deportment, the majesty of his countenance, and what were his holy exhortations to the people? I seem to hear him now relate how he conversed with John and many others who had seen Jesus Christ, words he had heard from their mouths. So Irenaeus is reminiscing his time spent with Polycarp and how he had been the disciple of John, the evangelist, and many others, many of the eyewitnesses of Jesus Christ. So this is one of the important aspects about Orthodox Christianity, is that the faith of these great saints and what they taught about the Holy Trinity, about the Eucharist, about the Church, about Scripture, the things that we hold on to in the Orthodox Church are so closely connected to the apostles. So if Polycarp conversed with John, the theologian, right, and he has the faith that John gave him, right, and so if Polycarp is saying Jesus Christ is the divine Son of God, that's not something he made up. That's something that John taught him, who walked and laid in the bosom of Christ. So it's a very clear chain, you see, and that's why their witness is very important. Okay, so let's read an actual letter that is, totally believed to even by secular whatever scholars, a real letter written by Ignatius to Polycarp. Okay. Not going to try comment too much. So this begins the letter. Ignatius, who is also called Theophorus, to Polycarp, bishop of the Church of the Smyranians, or rather, who has as his own bishop God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, wishes abundance of happiness. So it's a kind of greeting. Abundance of happiness. Having obtained good proof that your mind is fixed in God as upon an immovable rock, I loudly glorify his name, that I have been thought worthy to behold your blameless face, which I may ever enjoy in God. I entreat you by the grace with which you are clothed, to press forward in your course and to exhort all that they may be saved. Maintain your position with all care, both in the flesh and spirit. Have a regard to preserve unity, than which nothing is better. Bear with all, even as the Lord does with you. Support all in love, as also you do. Give yourself to prayer without ceasing. Implore additional understanding to what you already have. Be watchful, possessing a sleepless spirit. Speak to every man separately, as God enables you. Bear the infirmities of all, as being a perfect athlete in the Christian life, where the labor is great, but the gain is all the more. I mean, what an amazing opening line. So he's kind of encouraging Polycarp to remain a steadfast bishop. So a couple of comments. First of all, it's a local bishop writing to another bishop, right? So he has his flock there. He's coming from Antioch, but they serve one Lord in one church. The faith is an immovable rock. He speaks about it. He speaks about being saved, right? Press forward in your course that you may be saved. Maintain your position with care, both in flesh and spirit. Preserve unity, that the church is always meant to be one, right? He says nothing is better than that. And then he talks about pray without ceasing and possess a sleepless spirit. This is nexus. This is hesychasm already in the very, very early church, that we should continually pray, not cease praying. And then he speaks about speak to every man separately as God enables you. So this is also something very clear in the writings of Paul, but in the writings of the bishops of the church, they're meant to know everyone. Everyone in their flock, they must know personally and speak separately, so that we know one another. And I have to say, this is something even now in the Orthodox Church is very big. Everything is so close. I just spoke to Alexandra today, who's living in Moscow, South African girl. And, the priest that she serves under knows a priest in South Africa. Everyone kind of has a connection to one another. And so we know we're part of the same church. It's like they're so connected. Okay, so let's continue reading. If you love the good disciples, no thanks are due to you on that account, but rather seek by meekness to subdue the more troublesome. It's pastoral advice. Every kind of wound is not healed with the same plaster. Mitigate violent attacks of disease by gentle applications. Be in all things wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. For this purpose you are composed of both flesh and spirit, that you may deal tenderly with those evils that present themselves visibly before you. And as respects those that are not seen, pray that God would reveal them unto you, in order that you may be wanting in nothing, but may abound in every gift. The times call for you as pilots do for the winds, and as one tossed with tempest seeks for the haven, so that both you and those under your care may attain to God. Be sober as an athlete of God. The prize set before you is immortality and eternal life, of which you are also persuaded. In all things may my soul be for yours, and my bonds also, which you have loved. So he's saying, even at this time, you must be a pilot of the ship. You know, just as the winds require pilots, so you need to pilot the church. May you have discernment to heal each person with their spiritual illness. You know, each wound must have a healing that's like according to the type of wound. So he's saying, be gentle, have meekness, and see the spiritual and the physical weaknesses of your flock. It's really beautiful pastoral theology here. Let not those who seem worthy of credit, but teach strange doctrines, fill you with apprehension. Stand firm as does an anvil which is beaten. It is part of a noble athlete to be wounded and yet to conquer. And especially we ought to bear all things for the sake of God, that he also may bear with us. Be ever becoming more zealous than what you are. Weigh carefully the times. Look for him, so Christ, who is above all time, eternal and invisible, yet who became visible for our sakes, impalpable and impassible, yet who became possible on our account, and who in every kind of way suffered for our sakes. I mean, this already has all of the councils, the 7 ecumenical councils, is basically summarized there. He says, who in every kind of way suffered for our sakes. What Ignatius is teaching is that Christ became all things to heal. He took on the fullness of human nature. Right? He's not articulating it like the councils did, but it's there, it's in his theology. So what we're saying is that the teaching of the apostles was intact and full from the very beginning. Christianity didn't develop and change its doctrine. It only articulated it more so that we could understand, but it's very much present here. You know, he's speaking about, don't be disturbed about people who bring in strange doctrines. Stand firm against them, like an anvil which is beaten. You know, an athlete must be wounded, but still conquer. Okay. Now he speaks about the care for the people. Let not widows be neglected. Be after the Lord, their protector and friend. Oh, that's so beautiful. Like after God, you must be their protector and friend. Let nothing be done without your consent. See the bishop's authority. Nothing must be done. Not the Eucharist, not almsgiving. The bishop must give his blessing. Neither do anything without the approval of God, which indeed you do not, inasmuch as you are steadfast. Let your assembling together be of frequent occurrence. Seek after all by name. How interesting is that? He must know who, the assembly must be known. It must be the people that he knows. Know them by name. Know one another. I mean, when we take communion in the Orthodox Church, we say our name. Our names are known, right? You can't really give someone communion as a priest until they tell you their name. They have to say who they are, right? Often by the name, you can tell if they are Christian, right? Anyway, so beautiful. Now he speaks also more pastorally about certain things about the flock, right? The duties of husbands and wives. Flee evil arts. So sorry, that's the title of this chapter in his letter. So he's speaking about now married couples. Flee evil arts. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe someone can guess. But flee evil arts. But all the more discourse in public regarding them. How interesting is that? So don't do any of these evil practices, but even more, don't talk about them in public. Like, don't discuss them and make them a public thing. Then he says, speak to my sisters, so the women of the church, that they love the Lord and be satisfied with their husbands, both in the flesh and the spirits. So no adultery. In like manner also exhort my brethren in the name of Jesus Christ, that they love their wives even as the Lord the church. Right? He's quoting Ephesians. If anyone can continue in a state of purity to the honor of him who is the Lord of the flesh, let him so remain without boasting. So again, monastic life. But if he does choose the celibate life, he mustn't boast about it. If he begins to boast, he is undone. And if he reckon himself greater than the bishop, he is ruined. But it becomes both men and women who marry to form their union with the approval of the bishop, that their marriage may be according to God and not after their own lust. Let all things be done to the honor of God. So again, already here, Ignatius is speaking about marriage as a sacrament that is blessed by the church, by Christ, right? And so a married couple must get a blessing. They can't just marry for lust or something else, worldly reasons. Okay. Yes, question?
Yeah, Father, I'm just double checking this. Just on the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's here. Discourse here is a noun and not a verb. It just looks a little bit ambiguous. So flee evil arts, but all the more flee discourse in public regarding them, versus flee evil arts, but all the more, I don't know, discourse is sometimes a verb, like all the more discourse, talk about it in public. I don't know. But I mean, it's certainly the former, hey?
I could be wrong, actually. Maybe he's saying flee evil arts, but all the more discourse in public regarding them. Well, he's not saying, but all the more, admonish the brethren against it in discourse in public regarding them. So
I
think it's them. The them is the evil arts, right? So, but all the more discourse in public regarding evil arts.
Yeah, so it's okay, all right.
So I think the verb there is flee.
Yeah, so flee
evil
discourse.
arts.
Okay, all right.
All the more and discourse in the public regarding evil arts.
Yeah, okay,
I think so.
right. Yeah, I just find that like the semicolons a bit.
Yeah,
strange.
It's a bit strange,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think I'm rushing through this later, so I mean, there's probably a lot of nuances I'm just not getting to. So it's the letter of Ignatius to Polycarp. It's on New Advent. You can find quite easily.
Father?
Yes.
I was actually reading this letter today. So it's actually quite funny that we're going on it.
Oh, nice.
But what I was, when I also had a look at it, and the odds there, when I was kind of going into it, I was kind of researching to see what it could be, is that it came up to be, in that time, they were using, it would mean like practices and like techniques. So it could be associated with like sorcery, curses, and things like that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just totally kind of just guessing here, but if he's speaking to husbands and wives, probably because we do know in the Roman times, just like you see now, if you go down to the station, bring back lost lover and other weird things I won't mention on the catechesis. Okay. That kind of stuff was totally going on, like love potions and all to do with falling in love and all these kind of magical manipulative things regarding amorous relations or finding a lover or finding a husband and wife. And I think basically Christian marriage should have nothing to do with that.
Yes.
Or discussing it. And probably the discourses is like, like, oh, I'm a Pisces. Oh, he's a Libra. Oh, that's a perfect match. Oh, like you should go and blah, blah, blah. That kind of.
Yeah.
Something like that. It could also be to do with abortive things as well, but maybe I don't think this is the case here. But that was also something obviously Christians rejected. that women would take certain poisons to, bring on a miscarriage or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Great that you're reading it. I mean, very providential, hey? Okay.
Okay.
So here's now more about the bishop and his role, and the people's also obedient to the bishop. Now, this is very early, hey? This is now 2 generations after the apostles. So again, we can't say that, the church later on became clericalistic and, like bishops and stuff overexerting authority now in the church or something. So it says this: give heed to the bishop, that God may give heed to you. My soul be for theirs that are submissive to the bishop, to the presbyters, and to the deacons. Again, we see this threefold kind of hierarchy that still exists in the church today. And may my portion be along with them in God. Labor together with one another, strive in company together, run together, suffer together, sleep together, and awake together, as the stewards and associates and servants of God. So he's talking about the bishop, the priests, and the deacons, and all of the people must live together, go through everything together. Please him under whom you fight. So everything you do must be pleasing to Christ, and from whom you receive your wages. Okay, so he's reminding the bishops and all that your true wages are from God, right? Your true blessings. Let none of you be found a deserter. This was very important. Don't abandon Christ. Let none of you be found a deserter. Let your baptism endure as your arms, your faith as your helmet. So interesting. Let your baptism endure as your arms. I'm guessing that's your weapons, not your arms like your arms. It's your weapons. Let your baptism be endured as your arms, your faith as your helmet, your love as your spear, your patience as a complete panoply, which is, I think, a type of armor. Let your works be the charge assigned to you, that you may receive a worthy recompense. Be long-suffering, so be patient, therefore, with one another in meekness as God is towards you. May I have joy of you forever. Have you noticed Ignatius says that a lot to everyone? He's like, be patient with one another, meekness as God is patient towards you. He's always saying, like, God is dealing with all our troubles, so we have to deal with one another, like as God deals with us. Okay. Now Ignatius is preparing for his death and martyrdom. So now he starts to speak about, he cares about the church and he wants there to be now a successor and overseers. So this is what he says: seeing that the church which is at Antioch in Syria is, as report has informed me, at peace, through your prayers, I also am the more encouraged, resting without anxiety in God, if indeed by means of suffering I may attain to God, so that through your prayers I may be found a disciple of Christ. So again, he wants to be found a disciple. He's not saying I am a disciple. If I die for him, then I'm truly his disciple, right? And he's happy that the church in Syria and at Antioch is at peace. So after he's been arrested, he's on his way to Rome to be killed. The church is at peace, but now he wants to find a successor, someone, will make sure there's overseers there. It is fitting, O Polycarp, most blessed in God, to assemble a very solemn council, to elect one whom you greatly love, and know to be a man of activity, who may be designated the messenger of God, and to bestow on him this honor, that he may go into Syria and glorify your ever active love to the praise of Christ. A Christian has not power over himself, but must always be ready for the service of God. Now this work is both God's and yours, when you shall have completed it to his glory, for I trust that through grace you are prepared for every good work pertaining to God. Knowing therefore your energetic love of the truth, I have exhorted you by this brief epistle. So he's finishing off his letter now, saying, appoint someone, but first bring a council. So not just saying, Polycarp, go find someone. Assemble a solemn, so a serious, very council of overseers to elect this bishop of Antioch, which was one of the great cities of Rome, of the Roman Empire, and he must be one that's very active and a servant of Christ, right? So, and Polycarp has to preside over this. So you see how he's preparing for someone to continue to oversee the church. Let other churches also send to Antioch, inasmuch as I have not been able to write to all the churches, because I must suddenly sail from Troas to Neapolis, as the will of the emperor enjoins. I beg that you, as being acquainted with the purpose of God, will write to the adjacent churches, that they may also act in like manner, such as are able to do so, sending messengers, and the others transmitting letters to those persons who are sent by you, that you may be glorified by a work which shall be remembered forever, as indeed you are worthy to be. I salute all by name, and in particular the wife of Epitropos with all her house and children. I salute Attalos, my beloved. I salute him who shall be deemed worthy to go from you into Syria. Grace shall be with him forever, and with Polycarp that sends him. I pray for your happiness forever in our God Jesus Christ, by whom continue in the unity and under the protection of God. I salute Alce, my beloved, my dearly beloved. Farewell in the Lord. And that's the end of the letter. So again, he mentions people by name. He knows the people. He's sending these people out. And how interesting, the adjacent churches, so the surrounding churches, he also says, give them word. They must also participate in the the appointment of the new overseer, the bishop of Antioch, which was a very important see. So I hope that letter, so I'm just going to stop sharing. I hope that letter was interesting to see the church, how it functioned, and the great love, pastoral love Ignatius had for the church and for his disciples. I just love reading these letters. It makes you get to know like these people. They're not just kind of historical figures. So anyway, any questions?
Yeah.
I know we've gone over.
Yes, well, I was just actually going to touch on and say that, like reading through Ignatius' letters, it's like, yes, he was like going on his way to martyrdom, and like it's not just between him and Christ, but like yet he's thinking about and still teaching that love and humility for the church, and that's like so inspiring to me actually.
Yeah. I mean, Ignatius says this famous words. He says, please do not, when he's on his way, he's stopping past all these various churches, famous churches, the Smaranians, the Philadelphians, whoever, and he knows about them. You know, these Christians have great reputation, you know, doing all these great works in the Lord. And he says, please do not call for my release, because all the Christians were trying to release him. Like, it was a great scandal. How can you arrest the bishop of Antioch and now take him to trial in Rome? So they were all paying bribes and stuff to try to get him released. He says, please do not, I'll paraphrase, but basically, do not unjustly release me, because he wanted to die for Christ. And he says, may my body be become wheat that will be ground by the teeth of wild beasts, so that I may become the bread of life and may attain eternal life. So he was very much wanting to die as a martyr and not afraid of death. And as you say, he had great pastoral care while he's on his way in trial. He's not trying to write letters to free him. He's writing letters, pastoral care about the churches. You know, and he's even thinking about who's going to become his successor. So yeah, and these letters are really early. So I suggest everyone read them. They're really inspiring. Yeah. So thank you. Basil?
I'm just remembering when you did the catechesis, where I think you were dealing with these early fathers, and I remember being sorry, Father.
Yeah. No, we have a talk on Ignatius and his 7 letters, so you can go back to that lesson. It's old, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember being very inspired by that. Shame, I ended up having a very long phone call with you afterwards.
Yeah. No, but they're amazing things, you know. Amazing. We have not that much, but we have quite a lot of letters and things from this early period, which is very, and we still commemorate them. So this Sunday we commemorate Justin Martyr. So it's not like he's a forgotten person who's just part of the in the canon of saints.
Father, I just wanted to go back to that chapter 5 sentence, because I was just wondering, it depended on whether discourse was a noun or a verb there.
Yeah.
So I looked into it, because if it is a verb, then he's kind of saying the opposite.
Oh, so
It's
you
like
must talk
saying
about this
you
in
must
the.
you must talk about it. So I just double checked. So I found like the Greek, and then there's a different translation here, and it says, "Flee the evil arts. Indeed, deliver a sermon about them."
Oh, there we go. So it's actually the opposite. So it's just
Saying
like
like you got to
talk
warn
about
people about it. Yeah.
fleeing. Talk about fleeing. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Probably makes a bit more sense than like don't talk about it. Yeah. We need more Greeks to help us read these letters in the original. Okay. Any other
Sorry,
questions, or I think
sorry,
we should wrap
Father.
it up?
My app dies on this phone every so often.
Oh, there's two Basils.
Yeah.
It's
No, it's gone. The other one's gone.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I think they're saying like if people are doing, I don't know, it's a bit weird because you're not supposed to like go pointing out all the bad things people are doing, but I suppose um, it's if people are. I mean, I don't know, like if people are engaging in witchcraft or whatever, you need to tell
Well,
people in public about this is bad, don't do it.
yeah,
Right.
maybe it's not necessarily like about particular people, but just in general, like publicly speak against the magical arts or whatever.
I mean, I know I talk about him a lot, but I mean, Metropolitan Neophytus was basically pushed by Athenites and certain recent saints to be like, no, you need to go and talk about all these like bad things that people are doing. So maybe it's sort of in that kind of a vein. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Something that I really didn't know, and that I saw now when you brought up the slides, from Marcus Aurelius. My brother is really into Stoicism, and
Mm,
he always sends like me like these like those passages from these
mm.
people. But like from what Marcus Aurelius was teaching and persecuting Christians, that's quite hypocritical, actually.
Well, I think it is like you can. I actually did have the text of his criticism of Christians. I can't remember exactly what he was particularly. I'm so sure someone can share. Um, but there are lots of things that Stoics kind of wrote that is compatible with Christianity. So, and I mean, isn't that like every kind of middle-aged man's kind of like rite of passage? Like you got to get into Marcus Aurelius for a while and then abandon it. I don't know. Apparently, that's like that's like a meme. So we have to also be mature. Like there are things that we can read and say, like we don't have to make him a villain, in a sense. I don't know. I'm not that.
Yes, yes, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of
But
just
of
like
course, he
thinking.
was not a Christian. Right?
Yes.
He was opposed to
Obviously,
it.
I didn't know. Like, well, I'm not a Stoic, but
Yeah.
obviously, but like, because I just like I'm just going on the knowledge of like what my brother would send me,
Yeah.
and it was just funny now that I saw that because obviously I don't know much about Marcus Aurelius, but the from what he was sending me, and I was like, I'll read through it. It's like, okay, this sounds good. Like, it sounds cool and whatever. But then I didn't expect it to see his name there.
Yeah. He's one of the.
Yeah.
He presided over one of the persecutions. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Basil, did you find anything on the persecution of Marcus Aurelius? No.
I was just going to say that Chrysostomus did a couple videos a while back. They should be posted online, and in one of them he speaks about these different schools of philosophy from the Greeks leading up to Christianity, and so he talks about the Stoics and the Dionysians and that sort of thing. So if that interests you, it's worth checking out.
If you basically Google, okay, this is what Marcus Aurelius says. Okay, this is obviously just a Google search, but he viewed early Christians as misguided and obstinate atheists whose readiness for martyrdom lacked rational dignity. Okay, so yeah, that's a summary. I mean, I don't know if that's obviously maybe too simplified, but yeah, so he didn't quite like the way Christians were doing it. But anyway, we can get more into that next time maybe. Okay, I think let's wrap it up tonight. So next time, I think Ephraim is going to continue with the mystical theology from next week, which will be great. But continuing with church history, now we're going to begin with the time of the transition of the age of now, where Christianity was a minority religion, although ascending. Where how it transitioned to become the faith of the Roman Empire and beyond. I'll try also put some history of Christianity outside of the Roman Empire, because it spread further than just the Roman Empire. It went to the Persian Empire and into like Ethiopia and places like that, which were far beyond the borders, and Arabia. So I'll try add a little bit of that history as well, and also how these kingdoms, basically not only Rome but also Axum and many others, received Christianity. The Armenian empire as well, kingdom received Christianity and basically changed their whole way of life. It's an amazing part of history. So that's what we'll do next time. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks.